If a company decides you need to go but cannot remove you cleanly, it does not fire you. It changes the environment around you. The role stays the same on paper, your title stays the same, your desk stays the same, but the air around you shifts. Access shrinks, invitations disappear, conversations get shorter, and none of it comes with a reason you can point to. You feel it before you can prove it. That gap between feeling it and proving it is where the whole strategy lives. This is how retaliation works when termination is off the table. It is not loud, it is not obvious. It is a slow, structural adjustment designed to make you either leave on your own or collapse into something they can justify acting on. And the reason most people never recognize it while it is happening is because every individual piece looks normal. It only becomes visible when you stop looking at moments and start looking at sequences. The first thing that changes is access, and it almost always gets disguised as professionalism. You get removed from a meeting, no announcement, no confrontation, you just stop being invited. If you ask, someone tells you the meeting was restructured or that your input is no longer needed for that phase. It sounds reasonable, but what actually happened is that a decision was made to reduce your visibility inside a room where decisions get shaped. The people who stay in that room continue to influence direction. You do not. And over weeks, the distance between you and the center of the operation widens without anyone having to say a word about it. You didn't get removed, you got sidelined. And sidelining doesn't need paperwork. It doesn't need a conversation that could be quoted later. You simply stop being present where it matters, and the organization adjusts around your absence as though it were natural. No one tells you it is happening. That is why it works. The second shift is documentation pressure. This one tends to arrive right after a disagreement or a complaint. Suddenly, things that were handled verbally for months now require written confirmation. You start receiving emails that summarize conversations you had in hallways. Deadlines that were always informal become tracked. Performance expectations that were never quantified before are now specific and time-stamped. You think they got organized. They got deliberate. Every email that asks you to confirm a deliverable is also a record that can be referenced later. Every formalized expectation becomes a threshold you can be measured against, and the scrutiny is almost never applied evenly. The people around you continue operating the way everyone always did. You are the only one being asked to document, confirm, and justify. They didn't start tracking your work. They started building a file. When the standard changes for one person and one person only, it is not a policy shift. It is a targeting mechanism wrapped in process language. That wasn't feedback. That was positioning. The quieter it is, the harder it is to fight. And that is not a flaw in the method. That is the method. The third tactic is the one most people struggle to describe, even while it is destroying them. Your responsibilities get redistributed. A project you led gets handed to someone else because the team needs a different skill set, or because priorities shifted. You are not demoted. You are not reassigned. You are just gradually given less meaningful work while your title stays intact. And here is what makes this one so destabilizing. Your job still exists. You still show up. You still sit in the same chair, but the work that made you visible, that connected you to leadership, that gave your presence weight and your opinions relevance, gets quietly transferred to someone else. What replaces it is maintenance, low exposure tasks, work that nobody reports upward. You are still employed. You are just no longer positioned. And the confusion is enormous because nothing technically happened to you. There was no meeting, no demotion letter, no conversation where someone said your role was changing. It just changed. You went from being someone whose input shaped outcomes to someone whose output fills spreadsheets nobody reads. They didn't take your job, they hollowed it out. And if you stay long enough in a hollowed role, your reduced output becomes the evidence that you were never performing in the first place. The trap closes from the inside. The fourth method is reputation poisoning, and it almost always sounds like concern. A manager mentions in a skip-level meeting that you are talented but difficult to collaborate with. A peer review notes that your communication style creates friction. Someone describes you as resistant to change during a calibration session. None of these are career-ending on their own, but together they build a narrative that lives in rooms you are never in. The language is chosen carefully. Words like difficult and resistant and not a team player do not describe performance, they describe personality. And personality complaints are nearly impossible to rebut with data. You cannot open a spreadsheet and prove you are collaborative. That is the point. By the time you realize your reputation has been adjusted, the adjustment is already embedded in how leadership talks about you. You didn't become worse at your job, you became harder to control, and that got reframed as a character flaw. Nothing changed overnight, the tone changed. The fifth tactic is exhaustion, and it hides behind the word expectations. After you push back on something, or after a complaint surfaces, your workload increases. New deliverables appear, deadlines compress, cross-functional responsibilities land on you without any reduction in existing obligations. The framing is always the same. The team is under pressure. Everyone needs to step up. But when you look around, the increase landed almost entirely on you. The goal is not productivity. The goal is to engineer either burnout or failure. If you burn out, you leave. If you fail, you get documented. If you complain about the volume, you are not resilient. Every response you have to the pressure feeds the system. And the most disorienting part is that the work itself is real. The projects are legitimate. The deadlines are actual. The load just happens to be calibrated to a level one person cannot sustain indefinitely. That calibration is not an accident. It is architecture. Once you see this structure, the question is no longer whether something unfair is happening. The question is how to stop making it easier for the people running the pattern. That starts with one shift. Stop reacting emotionally in visible spaces. Every frustrated outburst, every sharp reply, every venting session with a colleague who may not be safe becomes raw material. It becomes evidence that you are struggling, that you are difficult, that you cannot handle pressure. You are not suppressing what you feel. You are refusing to provide ammunition in the format they needed. Start documenting in timelines, not memories, timelines. Dates, decisions, changes in access, changes in tone, specific language from specific emails. When instructions come verbally, follow up in writing. A short message that says, confirming what we discussed, forces clarity into a system that survives on ambiguity. When feedback arrives, ask what success looks like in terms that can be measured, not because you expect a useful answer, because the absence of one is its own kind of record. Protect the parts of your work that are visible above your manager's reach, the deliverables leadership sees directly, the metrics that get reported upward, the outputs that exist outside anyone's personal narrative. These are harder to distort when they are documented and traceable. And quietly, without announcements, expand your positioning outside the structure that is compressing you. Not because you are giving up, because leverage only exists when you are not trapped. The pattern does not survive recognition. Once you see that the meeting removal, the email shift, the workload spike, and the reputation adjustment all landed inside the same window, you stop treating each one as a coincidence. You stop explaining your own instability as a personal failing inside an environment that was redesigned to produce it. You start seeing the engineering underneath the surface, and once you see it, you do not go back. Not because you became cynical, because you became impossible to confuse. And confused is exactly what they needed you to stay.